Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a nice, clear, sunny day here in.
It's New England shore, but I can't tell you exactly where it is. Enlighten me.
This is Nantucket. This is the Brant Point um, daffodil wreath hanging ceremony that's done every spring in April, and that is the Coast Guard's lighthouse.
Now, I do not believe that Nantucket, the big whaling port of the 19th century, had a daffodil wreath ceremony. This must be pretty modern.
I kind of think you're right. I don't know how long that goes back, but I kind of don't think it goes back to what the Moby Dick days and all.
Right, yes.
But anyway, today we are going to have our third discussion about the use of AI models in the C-suite, and we're actually going to focus on the use of AI models by the CEO. And the point behind this is, Deirdre, that you and I are convinced that we have now, with the launch of the reasoning models that have been available to us now for about 3 or 4 months, the various versions, combined with the large language models, the Gen AI models that we've had now for a while,
Right.
the combination of those two, when put together in a smart way, can give the CEO a thought partner to work
Correct.
with. And if you followed the last couple of videos we've done, 62 and 63, we've talked about that. We've introduced the concept, but in this one, we're not going to get into to actually going into the models today. We're going to talk conceptually about what you could do with them and how you do it,
Yeah.
so that people understand that from the C level and the CEO specifically. So, um,
And I think this is so important, Tom, because you and I were discussing just 2 days ago how a major business publication, a highly respected one, came out with an article which was along the lines of, gee, CEO, you can use a basic LLM to write communications to your team. And I almost laughed because that is, for us, that's so basic a task. But it's also, as we've been discussing, it's almost the wrong type of task
mhm.
to use because any good executive's team knows how that executive communicates and can pick up very easily when something is machine generated or from the pen of the executive. And it goes back to what Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. If you send out these machine generated messages to your team, they're going to not take it well. They're going to wonder why you're not writing to them directly. So I would think about what was posited as a very simple use and then shift your thinking into doing the sort of work that we talked about in episode 62 and 63, and which you're now defining for people, because I'm guessing most people aren't really attuned to the difference between the LLMs and the reasoning models. So over to
Yes,
you.
yes. We're going to talk about the reasoning models and the distinction between what an LLM does and what it does well, and then what reasoning models do and what they do well. And they are I won't get into the technical description of them just because that's not something we need to cover here. There is a distinction in how they function. And as a result, they add different things. And the key thing that a reasoning model adds to what an LLM does is it adds the interpretation of the information and
Yes.
recycling until it gets the optimal interpretation of the information, as opposed to searching and synthesizing what it finds. Those are two different functions. And in fact, you and I are going to say you actually want to reverse them, really, because you want to use the actual reasoning model, the iteration, the logical process. You want to use that first and then use the synthesizing of it all once you've got that collected. And we'll show how that functions. The reason why we're doing this, Deirdre, is for two solid reasons. One is we think this is what the C-suite is going to look like not too many years from now. If not, and in some cases, I know it's already because you and I are helping some companies that are doing this or adopting this. And so we know companies are interested once they're introduced, that we know that they're interested. But I think this is going to become the standard for how the C-level, people we call tech builders, the people that are building technology-based businesses, and soon, if not already, every business is going to be a tech business. It's just a matter of to what degree is it a tech business. That being said, our view is that the sooner that you understand this ability and can use it, the better, for a lot of reasons, which we'll demonstrate as we go through, or we'll describe as we go through. We've already demonstrated, but we're going to do another few of these where we'll go even deeper. The other thing I'll say about this, Deirdre, is that what we're going to describe is much more than automation, right? The article you're referring to, I'm having a hard time stopping myself from talking about where it comes from.
Right.
We're so used to using those initials, but uh, that article focused on the amazing fact that the C-suite now has an incredible productivity tool, and you and I are going, "Are you kidding me?"
Yep.
Um, anyway, we shouldn't disparage too much. But what bothers us about that is that our top level people should be getting as the communication, the leading edge, not the trailing edge. And you and
Correct.
I see that as trailing edge communication. And they were very proud of the research that their professors had done and how they were causing this thing to now raise the issue again because they thought it was really great, even though it was done about a year ago or so. So it is great. It's a great deal more than automation. What we're going to show today is a combination of a bunch of different things, but fundamentally, it's about a thought partner for the CEO without it being a person.
Correct.
And there are some benefits to that and some downsides, but we'll get into that. So we're going to describe not only how we think about this, but also a process for describing what kind of use cases could you put this to. If you're a tech builder, many of the entrepreneurial companies, especially the ones you and I built early on, you don't have a lot of staff. And the people that are doing the functional jobs, they're busy doing the functional jobs. And to be able to do market what if cases, to be able to do strategic cases, to be doing market analysis that's beyond what you need to do the job today, those are hard to find the time.
Right.
This is a way to do it without having to go hire someone to come in to either consulting help to do it for you, or hire an individual to come in and do it. And then you're out of context. So then you have to feed the individual or the consultant a lot of context material so they can do it correctly. So we'll talk about that. And then at the end, we'll show a process. How do you now combine this all? Because if it's a partnership, it's a human and machine partnership, it's a thought partnership. Each one has their responsibility. It's not like you can just step away and let the machine do it, which was sort of the way this this thing said, like feed the question in and then let it feed you the answer, you sign and go, right?
Right.
Uh, that's not the way you and I think about these things anyway, uh, but it's not that. Can you
Right.
do those things? Absolutely. And does that help you at the end? Absolutely. It's not the reason you do it. I think, not the CEO themselves for their work. And then finally, we'll talk about just the actual flow of if you took an example, and I have sort of a fun or almost an absurd example, And how would you flow that through the process so that everyone can see that? So with that, Deirdre, I'm going to bring up some slides, and we won't, hopefully we won't bore you with this, but again, this is not going to be great for the people that are listening to us in the car or while they're out exercising or whatever, but we'll do our best to try to make it so you don't have to see these slides, but we'll make sure these slides are available if people would like to have them. But what this does is this is when you and I think about a CEO and when we think about the top level use case subjects that they could approach this. And again, this is, as we always say, this is an opinion of one and one. This is only our view. And please make sure you understand that there's plenty of room for debate and alternate views. But this is our view, that if you're going to use reasoning models and synthesis models and combine them, there are three big topics that you could use as subjects. The first one is what you and I would call considered answers. And this is beyond search. This is beyond going to a Google search or some other search engine and asking a simple question like, how do I spell naive again? Right? Or is it accept or accept? This is about when you have a question, a legitimate question about a law or a practice or something. These tools, when they're used appropriately, can give you some really powerful answers very quickly. It depends, though, on, like many things, it depends on how you ask the question. And once you do this for a while, those questions, as all of you, I'm sure, know, are called prompts. And so you'll hear us use that term, but it's prompt dependent. But these can be powerful tools. I mean, I use this. I have one of the models on my phone as an app, and I turn to it much more frequently. I would say it probably is 5 to 1 versus search to do something that I'd like an answer to in everyday life, no matter whether it's personal or business. The second major category is something the thing we're going to explore today, and that's what you and I would call C-level analysis. It's when you look at the big subjects that we worry about as tech builders, as people that build companies from the CEO level down, we say that three different ways of looking at the world kind of give you a lot of it. One is, what are you missing? Right? What are you missing about the situation you're staring at? Secondly, how do motivations work of all the players? Are they aligned? Are they opposed? Do you know? Do you have visibility? Are they trying to hide their motivation from you? What does that mean to how you're functioning? And then the factor of time. Is time your friend or your enemy? Because if it's your friend, you have more time to figure out when to do things and how deeply to approach them. If time is your enemy, meaning you don't have a lot of time, then you have to circumvent and find out what exactly do you have to know before you make a move. And then there are other factors that play in here. It's the resources you need, the risks you may face beyond the ones we've talked about. A topic you and I talk about frequently is market friction. This is you can think about this as the headwinds in the market or the tide flowing against you or rip tides flowing sideways. And then at various analysis structures, some people are very good at analysis structures, some are not. And many times these things can elucidate these structures for you. And then lastly, it's the point that this publication was making. And we still think there's value here, but the value is in using it as a productivity tool for writing, where you let it sketch out an answer for you or a proposed letter, and then you rewrite it in your language. So you can gain productivity there. But to your point, Deirdre, it's about making sure that in the end it's you that's writing and not somebody else or something else. And I know you have a lot of thoughts about this, but before I move on to the next piece, I thought I'd let you take a second with this.
Just remember you're talking about these tools as thought partners, that we talk about the human machine partnership. And we actually talk about how the final output is more human than machine for reasons we'll get into as we go through this video. But in writing in particular, this is where it is so easy to tell whether someone's actually done the thinking that you would want them to do. When I, as a professor, get a submission from a student, I can tell very quickly whether they just pulled this out of their printer and handed it in or emailed it to me without contributing the human part to it. That the human part is what creates, to my mind, the real value in terms of being able to use, to apply, to deliver results from this. These tools are amazing, as you will show in a second, and as we've already shown in videos of 62 and 63. But it is the humans who bring into it their own context and understanding and knowledge and mindset to create the final written document that then has the value that you would want. And I'll stop at this point, although, as you say, I could go on for a long time about this.
Yes, we'll get to a slide on how do you use this, and we'll talk about those aspects that you bring to it and the importance of them. So next, I'd like to just discuss what are these models? What are they? So the ones on the left, Deirdre, the large language models, Gen AI models, those are generally referred to as LLMs, and I'm sure almost everybody on this call knows that. I did some research yesterday to make sure I was up to date. These are the top five. Now, I would tell you that top five in terms of users, but I am sure that these data, you and I are both a little queasy about this data. I pulled together a number of different sources and tried to normalize what I was getting here. This is roughly what I would guess is right. I don't really, as you and I don't have a real view of Owen, the Alibaba solution. So we don't have a sense of how many people are using that. We sense a lot because of the demographic of that being, Alibaba based, Chinese based. But we all know that ChatGPT or GPT-4o has been out, or the GPT work has been there for a while. Claude from Anthropic is second. Claude is many times the use of the professional, the software developer. It's used for code development. It's also an incredibly good synthesis machine. And we use it. That's why I have highlighted it. It's just because we find it to give the best answers for the synthesis piece. Although we would say we've had good, solid results from Gemini, which is the Google product. And a little bit of the criticism of Gemini is around it's cautious. Now that stems from a little bit of its history. It was a little, what's the opposite of cautious, dear? Reckless, perhaps? I mean, maybe that's a little harsh, but
Yes, it came out with some questionable results that actually made the news because they were so questionable.
to the point where
So
they
it
had to
pulled back. Yes.
yeah, they actually had to take the application down, redo it, and launch it a second time. And now it's talked about being somewhat cautious. Who knows? I found it to be excellent. I think it's a great. I use it as a backup to Claude. For what I do on the reasoning model side, I use Grok 3, but we'll talk about why in a minute. And then there's Owen. On the reasoning model side, and we'll get to the distinction in a minute. On the reasoning model side, these are relatively recent releases. So this functionality really wasn't that specifically with us until DeepSeek OpenAI zero 01. The Gemini 2.0 Flash Thinking, that's an experimental model that Google has. Claude 3.7 Sonnet, you can see it's the same model. It has elements of reasoning in it, but it lacks some of the most important aspects of reasoning models, which are called explainability, where it actually goes through and demonstrates in a separate window exactly what it's doing, to the point of talking about when it does iterate back and look for different data because it's finding conflicting data when it's doing its work. Explainability is a key element of a factor that you and I talk about, which is believability or the validity of the answers. And then there's Owen. And again, you'll see that Owen, just like Grok, like Claude, has the same. Now, the difference in Grok actually has a separate module that you have to enable. You have to turn it on. You'll see us using it in, especially in our episode 63, where we actually describe how you have to turn it on, much like a thermostat to the, to enable it and then disable it
Right.
in its
I,
function.
I think an important point about these reasoning models, Tom, is that a lot of the ranking was done by self-reporting. That is by what each of these models claimed they could do. You and I, especially you, have found that the capabilities of the model, of the reasoning models, are far broader, far all over the place, as opposed to the LLMs. The LLMs are reasonably consistent in the sort of thing they do. What are called the reasoning models vary quite a bit because some of these producers claim to be doing reasoning and they're not really, while others of these models are really good at the sort of reasoning that you're explaining. I just think that's an important point for people to be aware of. We talk about how people have to experiment with the models. Well, expect to experiment a lot when you get into the reasoning models.
The most important thing is in our guidance, and I was just mentioning this to a tech CEO earlier this week, who's a way deeper tech engineer than I am, and I'm not a tech engineer, but he is deep in tech engineer, CEO of a tech company, founder, uh, not particular this particular company, but but in prior companies. He had not really spent the time to try to think about this in this way, and so you're talking about, we're introducing you to things that are relatively bleeding edge, but we're doing it because they do have real value, and this capability has real value you can take advantage of. The thing I would say is that some of these models, especially things like DeepSeek or OpenAI, early, the first generation of Gemini, they experienced some issues that became concerning. Some of them still have them, um, and for different reasons. So, with all of these things, it's important that you satisfy yourself you're using reliable materials. Because of some things I do, I have to use Grok for certain things, especially reasoning. I have no choice because the job demands it, or the responsibility I've assumed it demands. I on the synthesis side, I use really two. I use Claude and I use Grok, again, in slightly different ways. So you have to use the ones that are comfortable to you. Many people are very comfortable with OpenAI or the Chat GPT. And so again, our view is use what you're comfortable with, that you find do the job. You'll see Grok and you'll see Claude in what we do. So that'll give you that view. And if you really, really want to understand this, ask simple questions of the models. Does 2 plus 2 equal 4? And you'd be shocked at some of the answers we got very early on in some of these models, right? Well, it depends, right? Okay. Um, of course it depends, but it also depends on how you tell me it depends, right? And that's the key. And just figure out a handful of these questions to ask to satisfy yourself that you're getting something that you can believe in and believe is generally valid. So what this does, Deirdre, and we're almost at the end of our slides, and then we'll talk about the practical aspect here. This is how you use these models. So we think about the two things. You've got the human component and you have the machine component. And if you think about, stop for a second and think about some of the most advanced work that's being done today in the combination of the concept of a human-machine partnership. What you'll find is that it is what does the machine do well and what does the human do well? A machine it can predict in smart ways. And it can predict in smart ways based on historic knowledge. That's where it's the most solid in today's world. That may change tomorrow, but in today's world, it's in its most solid form when it's predicting based on past experience that it has and how broad a base of experience it has and how narrow you focus it within that base of experience. And if you really got back, and there was a great book at one point, I don't know if it's still terribly valid for today, but it's a solid book called Prediction Machines. And it was one of the early versions. You and I read that, Deirdre, when it came out, if you recall. And it did a great job of describing what is artificial intelligence and how did it come about and what are the basic use cases. And fundamentally, it's smart prediction is the obvious answer. So that's what machines do well. What do humans do well? Well, there's a lot of research that says what humans do well is they do really well dealing with the unpredicted, with the unexpected. Now, not every human does, right? And this is what I think, Deirdre, where Darwin had the revelation that some humans and some animals and some species of life do a better job of this than others
Yes.
for various reasons. But that's where the real essence is in the human side. So it's the combination of the two. And I'm not going to waste people's time on this, but there is, if anybody cares, you can just send me a note or something. I can turn you on to a description. And there's a great podcast that goes through and describes how this applies to space exploration. And it's the combination of the machine and the human and how that plays both in terms of how much knowledge and the power of the machine in the space capsule that may be significantly far away from the Earth, so you can't expect immediate communication to get your answers. So you're kind of by yourself for a while. So let's talk about the components. This starts out with the human side are three fundamental things. One is it's your job to guide the model through prompts. So if you think about this, this is much like you would do with and Deirdre, you call them what? Very smart
Very smart grad students
with limited experience.
with limited experience. And that's, this sounds so simple, doesn't it, Tom? You just guide the models through the prompts. But anyone thinking about this understands that how you word your prompts can guide the research in the direction you want or the direction you don't want. And this is where what we talk about the mindset, the knowledge, the guts, the instincts of the executive driving the prompts becomes so important. You need to create a base of knowledge from which the machine works. And you show this in, I think it's both in episode 62 and 63, how you enter knowledge into the machine and it draws on that to do the work. But you will get the greater value out of the sort of process we're talking about if you do have a good starting point and know how to ask the right questions. That's so important. A prompt is a question. You know how to ask the right questions. And I'll stop on this, although another
Well,
workplace that got a lot to say. But,
it's an analog, Deirdre, of dealing with that smart, recent MBA or
right,
Master of Science in Tech, um, who has limited experience and limited context in your market. You have to find a way to educate them in that, and then
right,
also set the direction you want them to go, and then pre-plan how you'd like to see the work happen.
right,
And that's the key to this is the first thing that I do, and you know this, dear, I sit down and I work out what is the direction I outline, what's the direction I want the model to go in. And I don't try to presume the answer, but I try to presume what steps do I expect to have to take. Now, invariably, it will cause me to have to take more steps or different steps, and I have to modify my pre-planned prompts. But I actually plan the prompt, and I plan what kind of information do I feed in. Now, the thing I would say about that is this, that um, you will also, as you're using these models, and if you watch 62 and 63, you'll see that frequently I don't respond to the machine because early on, I'm trying to get the machine to go a certain direction, and it is trying to help me figure out a direction to go. So it frequently asks me to give it direction on how it proposes to go. I ignore those and just say, what if we did this? The exact same way you would do for this MBA. Because they come to you and I say to you, Deirdre, here, I don't want to not have a proposal for you, right? So I would say, here's what I think the next steps are. And you would say, those are good. Those are really good. Perhaps, though, we should do this,
right.
right? It's the same approach. So using the models is no different than this smart, um, limited context, limited experience MBA or Master of Science in Technology. So then that's the key thing that you have to provide early on is that direction setting through prompts and have a pre-planned view of where you want to go and then guide the model in going that direction. The second aspect is really important, and that's the believability point, Deirdre, that you have coined, which is about validity. Validity from beginning to end. And this also is something you would bring to, because I could walk into Deirdre as somebody did to me 2 weeks ago, right? Deirdre, when somebody brought me something, it looked wonderful. I
Yeah,
mean, they had done a wonderful job on ChatGPT and had produced this great thing. It was not believable. It just wasn't believable. Now, they are technical with limited business guidance. Then I have another friend who's strong in both, and they did a good job, and they were halfway there, but they needed to go further and contribute more of the business piece in there and not rely so much on the model when it came to the end.
right.
So it's that validity, Deirdre. It's providing that constant context update and then validity of the direction.
hmm And this is actually a danger point, and maybe that's a way to describe it. That a lot of people may think, oh, this machine is generating this, it's spitting something out, therefore it's good and I can run with this. And a lot of people get into this way of thinking that, oh, what a machine generates is good and right, and therefore I should use that. No, you've got to understand that you as the human contribute your understanding of how this is to be used. And it's best to think about it. We keep talking about this, Tom, that this is your first draft, and that you then have the responsibility to create the plan that you will use to implement because you are the one who knows the context. Remember how these machines are trained. They're trained by people who don't know your marketplace, don't know your business, don't know your competitors, don't and they're trained on data that's been scraped off of the internet. So they know certain things, but they don't know whether what they're putting together applies to your marketplace, to your business, to your customers. That's the context that you have to bring to that. And it's only when, and it's possible through a series of prompts, or it's possible through you taking the output and then revising it yourself. It's only when you build in the context that you have a valid tool that you can then use to deliver, and you know what word I'm about to say next, Tom, to deliver results. That's where I always focus.
Yeah.
Can this output deliver the results that you need? And it's likely that it can't without significant human input at this point.
There's no doubt. We've run so many examples of this, Deirdre, that I've not seen a single thing yet that has where it hasn't, we haven't had to do strong direction at the end
Right.
and really change some fundamental things at the end to say, I just don't want to take that risk, or this is not really not a focus, or I really don't, right? It's just the way that the world works in that respect of how you as the leader have to sharpen the very end right before you put the action together to function and to make it
Correct.
real. Documentation. Now, this is actually not as hard as it may seem, but it's really important to document here because you're going to find out, especially if you've watched, especially 63, you're going to see the machine pumps out an enormous amount of content. And you need to keep track of two things. One, keep track of the content. How much of it was influenced by you and in what way? So you kind of want to keep not just the content itself, but you want to keep the prompt that got that content so that you know why it got there. So part of it's not really that hard because at the end, when you're ready to move away, and we'll show this in the next slide, you can actually have the machine give you your prompts are on your prompt thing, and you can go back very quickly and retrieve those. But you can have it create working papers for you, meaning it can actually summarize in great detail everything it's done. Do it in a document. That can be something you can keep as a document of that work. And then it's also your responsibility to direct the actual output itself at the end. So now when we go over to the machine, and this human component, it occurs all the way through the use of the machine. So what research models do, and these are what you and I call reasoning models, and they're really good for research and problem solving. And a lot of times detailed physics, chemistry, architecture, building, mechanical engineering. They're incredible at solving some of these problems, mathematics, um, and rendering complex drawings and conceptual models. These reasoning models, they do three things fundamentally. And again, I'm not giving you a technical description here. This is a layman's description because we're not doing it for any purpose other than trying to elucidate what these things do and compare. They do broad-based searches, meaning they'll iterate because they'll say in that interpretation phase, which is the second phase, the reasoning piece of it, they'll look and say, you know what, the stuff I collected isn't quite good enough because I'm seeing too much that conflicts, or I'm not exactly answering the question I need to have answered. So I'm going to expand things and go further. And they'll figure out how to plow through and broaden that search. They all do the second thing. They synthesize the result and structure it for you. But the strength of a reasoning model is not in synthesis and structure. That's why you have the parentheses. It's in the first two. That the real value is in this broad base of searching and interpreting. And that is what you and I would think of as research. And you almost have to think about what it's doing in those frames. And then once you've done the research, then you want something that will take and make sense of it beyond what you got from research. And this is then the synthesis of the information and then structuring it in some format and providing that as output. The real strength of the LLMs, and these are the models we've had available to us for a while, is this ability to synthesize and to structure. And it does do contextual search. So when you say, can you write me um, uh, a letter of recommendation for somebody I'd like to write, and here's what I know about them, and here's what the requirements are of that, and so forth. Can you do this for me? It'll go out and do a contextual search. What do those letters frequently have? How are they written? And it will then synthesize what you gave it, what it found, and it will then structure what it synthesized and provide that letter for you as a piece of output. And, many times it can be really good, and then you take and can rewrite it in your approach and take the things that don't make sense, make them make sense, add things, subtract things, but it gives you a first draft. And that's what LLMs are good for. You and I both, Deirdre, have been involved in things where we've seen these being used to do exactly that, to compare a professional's answer with that of a service professional, with that of the machine. And I didn't miss very often. And I looked at thousands of these answers, guessing which one was which. And I actually went further because what they wanted to know is which one is which and what was my reaction to each one of them. That was really what they wanted. What was my reaction to it? But I could tell that I thought I saw what were wrong answers on both sides. Because on the machine side, I thought it may not have the context that the service person had. And sometimes the service person cut short describing thoroughly enough the context, which me as a layman, I appreciated that. So even though it sounded like a machine, I kind of appreciated that answer. And since they were both the same, I had confidence in it. But again, these things can be used for the right reasons. They're valid, but we think the synthesis and structure by itself is not as useful to the CEO level people as it is when you combine it with the research, the deep research work. Any thoughts before we go to our final chart here, Deirdre?
That this takes practice. And I think that the more you actually start messing around with these models, there's a technical term for you, Tom, messing
Yeah.
around with these things, the more you'll understand how these tools can provide value for you. I agree with you that you need the broad research of the reasoning model and also the interpretation to some degree, understanding that their interpretation may not be your interpretation, but you do want to get that. But then putting it together is the synthesis is probably an underrated aspect to this. That whenever any of us have written these massive papers, we've got, things all over the place. The tool just puts it all together in a good structure for you. Obviously, you have to determine whether it's the correct structure, but it just presents all of the things that you've been prompting the machines to work on in a way so that you can think it through in an organized way. That is, I think, perhaps the main benefit of these LLMs, its ability to synthesize all of this information in a logical way that can then be used.
So finally, let's talk about a candy bar situation. So I want to use an absurd example here so that we don't get caught up in what we're doing, but caught up more in the process. So how might you do this? So let's say that you're like me, that you spent many years as a young person in a different country, and you had your favorite candy that you liked. And then you get to the United States or back to the United States in my case, and it's not sold here. And now I have a business that's still not sold here. And nothing is like that. So you might be able to come at it this way. I'd put a prompt plan together first. I'd say, you know what, here's kind of the direction I want to head here. I'd like to find out what the top ones are around the world. I'd like to also then zero in on this market. and then say, what is similar to that one that's there in that particular market abroad? Is there something similar here, right? I'd put all that stuff together and I'd put together prompts. So it would be, as we've said here, the top product in the market by country, by region. Now, why am I asking it there? Because I'm going to ask some interesting questions later, you'll see. And then I'm going to do a target market selection for the opportunity analysis, and that's going to be here. And I'm going to look for gap identification. One way that you can get good gap information pretty quickly is by asking in the existing marketplace with the existing products, what are the pros and cons and the likes and dislikes? Because very quickly you can, when you do this often enough and well enough with the sources, you can find out where the gaps are. And then I would like to know what product meets which of the gaps above. And is that product in the marketplace today or is it not in the marketplace? And is that marketplace somewhere else? So I'd look at what are the characteristics and I'd look for needs-based characteristics. And then I'd say, okay, I don't have one of these in the United States and it exists over here. And there seems to be people that like this one in the United States, but they would also like this because it solves some of their needs. I could then do market analysis on size. I could do all of those things by asking the proper prompts. What I'm really looking at, does it exist elsewhere? And could it fit the gap? Right? What are the options to fit that gap? So you would then design prompts to give you those answers in the sequence you'd like to see them. But the idea is you may be able to do that. Now, you'd be asking yourself all along, question number 4, am I missing anything so far? One of the things you're missing right now is you're missing, okay, well, maybe I've identified that product exists today in the Netherlands. How can I import it? Or am I able to import it? Am I able to get that product that exists in the Netherlands from Canada because Canada sells, right? Meaning you ask the kinds of questions you would ask when you know the market, or if you don't know the market, you even ask, what have we not talked about that we should talk about? And this is where the reasoning model will go through and say, in this kind of a situation, these are frequently the kinds of questions that get asked. And I will do that analysis for you. One of the benefits of reasoning models is for them to do the work they do well, which is this contextual, this broad-based searching that is based on iteration and logical sequences. It will be able to search these things for you. And you'd take your whole way through this kind of thing because you obviously there'd be cost issues and there could be trade barriers to it and there could be pricing issues and competitive pricing in this country versus there, all these sorts of things. What you'll find when you do this work, and if you do it the way we've described, you're going to end up with a lot of material because you're going to have moved it around. You're going to ask this question that didn't lead very far, so you're going to go down this path. You're going to get down to asking yourself number 5, look, can you summarize all this for me? Because I can't make sense of it yet. I mean, you've told me a lot. I just can't figure out and it will take and summarize everything. We call these work papers because you don't really want to make them output documents. You'd really just like to have a documentation, but you'd like it to use its ability to document it all for you in one place, and it will create a document, and we call it a set of working papers, which summarizes the direction you went and the output that you got from doing all this work on the left that sounds like reasoning work, right? Research work. And when you're at the point where you say, all right, I now need to put this in a synthesized structure, in a business plan format, or a white paper format, or a proposal format, or a strategic opportunity, or a market opportunity, or an M&A proposal, or an acquisition proposal, whatever you're doing, which by the way, we could do everything that we just said there. When you're at the point where you say, I'm ready to start to structure it like that, to see what it tells you, including doing a business plan with some financial projections, because it can do that for you too, based on data. You would then say, all right, it's time to move over to the LLM and literally take your working papers and put it into the LLM as proprietary knowledge that you're giving the LLM to give it priority search in that data first and saying, look, go look there. Now, to make this even more interesting, you'd say, well, I'd like you to write whatever you write to me. You can use whatever structure you want. You can use bullets, you can use numbers, you can use paragraphs, you can use, but I really would rather you not get highly technical or use colloquial language. I'd like to be short, clear sentences, not long run-on sentences. I don't like long paragraphs. You can say whatever you want. You can say nothing and let it just do its thing. Or you can get very technical in how. We demonstrated and actually showed you some of this in 62 and 63, mostly in 63. Now, on top of that, we load our books in and we load our bios in. So it knows something about us and what we've done. And so it has a slant on that. And it used the language that we use in our books. It reflected in the work it's done. So it's very powerful to be able to do it that way. Um, Now, what you'll really say to it then is, in this case, create a plan to fill that gap for me. And you'll write the proper prompt. I didn't try to write a prompt here for you, but you understand the point. Or create a funding proposal for me, or create this M&A doc for me. And you can even not even tell it what that document looks like and say, go research the ones, or not say a thing, and it'll go do the research and try to find that structure for you. Because you said up at the top in the knowledge, you said you can use whatever structures you'd like. Then you again are once it's done there, you'd ask yourself again, is there anything I'm missing here before I take the next step, which is, all right, now I'd like an output document. I'd like a business plan. I'd like an executive summary. I'd like a short and long presentation. I'd like a cover letter. And you can decide however you want to do it. Now, I would just tell you from having worked with these models, a lot of people are playing with these things, so it's better not to ask a multi-stage question. We demonstrated in 63, we demonstrated how I gave it a multi-layered question and it ground to a halt. Not because of my question. It could answer the question. It's just it takes a lot of compute power and um, and they're rationing compute power. No matter how much you spend with them, they still ration with compute power. And we had one time where it actually did go through, but it just stopped and didn't finish. And it said, I haven't finished. And it was it. So when you ask these, you may want to say, please give me a business plan. Boom. Can you give me an exec summary? Can you give me a presentation? Now, when we do this, we prefer at this stage to let it give us what it's got. And let's see what the model is saying. And then we start heavy editing and heavy restructuring. We likely will always end up at least a couple of times back in the research side and say, when we're done, can you update the working papers for us for these things we just figured out? So you actually want to, things you might not ever do if it were just you and one smart person, or even with a consultant. You just don't want to spend the time on the clock having them do all these iterations where these things happen so fast and so rapidly, and there's so little time involved on both sides that you can ask those questions and do those iterations that you really probably practically wouldn't do if you didn't do it this way. And so you go through and do these things, and it can do a beautiful job of writing these documents and giving you a first crack at this. You will want to go through, and again, even through the business plan itself, or if you say, please give me a 50-page white paper, which I did in one case, this Deirdre, I know you know. I went through and rewrote the thing because it didn't always convey it in the way that I would like to see it conveyed, even though it was not meant to be a published white paper. It was really more in support of a 5 or 7 page proposal that went out as a letter. But regardless, there's so much you have the ability to do here, always keeping in mind the human component throughout, to guide the model through from beginning to end with the prompts and how the direction you want it to set, and constantly looking at this point about believability. Do you believe what you're hearing all the way through this thing and the validity of it? And then the documentation to make sure you have kept up with the what happened when. Because one of the things you'll find is when you start iterating, if you haven't gone through and closed out the prior iteration or documented it properly, you have an issue. So, but we've covered almost everything we've talked about here. We covered in either 62 or 63, certainly a little more detail in 63. So that is the essence of it. And I know we're reaching probably the point of boredom. I hope that is only that me and you, it's not our listeners, but we're almost an hour and a half here, and I don't want to, or is it an hour? It's almost an
An
hour.
hour, almost an
Okay.
hour.
That makes
Uh,
me feel better, but I still was hoping we would do this in less than an hour.
Right. I do want to make the point though, where on that slide 4, you had output, and by now every listener knows that that output is just draft output. But I feel like a professor that I've got to say it again. That is draft output, and remember that we're talking about that output at the level of a summer intern or a bright graduate student. And you, as a CEO or CIO or COO, are supposed to be an expert in this. So if you do not take this draft output by your intern and bring your expertise to it, people will wonder what you've created here. That you are filling that gap between what the intern created and what reflects your expertise, knowledge of the marketplace, business sense, and instincts to create something that then can be used, executed, and deliver results. In this example, for in the candy bar, only recently has this shortage of the raw cocoa beans arisen. You, as an expert, will know about this. Odds are the machine has not been programmed yet or has not yet been trained on this late piece of information, so it has not brought that in. And yet, that shortage could affect this whole plan. So, that's a fairly obvious example about how your expertise has to drive what happens to this output.
Yes, and you'll notice in 62, the research we did talk about tariffs, but it didn't have the daily thing that happened that day.
Right.
And certain of these factors, especially when you're facing the way that we as a country are trying to reshape everything, literally everything, including the rebalancing among all of our trading partners. And it's actually, we're rebalancing world commerce is the essence of it, and trying to also skew toward peace and away from a war economy for so many people. Very difficult things to do. And it's very difficult to be current on all these things. And so even though the models may be valid as of yesterday, it's still, the research models are valid as of yesterday for the most part. Certainly Grok is. So the one thing I would say too about this, Deirdre, is that you you're facing a lot of change. This is a perfect time to be able to use and do this sort of work. And because it gives you the flexibility to ask the kind of questions you might not be able to even want to ask your team, because the type of subject may be the kind of subject you don't want your team to even hear you thinking about, where you could be doing this work yourself and getting these answers for yourself, or at least contextual answers. Um, that's where I really see the benefit of this is that literally that smart person that can help you think through the not only do the work but help you think through the situations. So we'll with that we'll stop. We did describe we actually did show everything we talked about. We showed in 62 and 63 to varying levels of expertise. As we always say, please tell us what you need. This video is a result of things we've heard from people that have been using our videos. So it really helps. And if you need help, let us know because we're glad to help you or elucidate things for you. So with that, I will say, do anything left to add?
Just that we're doing a few more videos on the topic of using these models, so stay tuned.
Yes. The other thing I would tell you is that the final point is this is exactly the way you would use it in the classroom.
Yes.
Exactly. But the difference is instead of what you normally do in most business situations, you don't get very much of the working paper. You really get the output. In this case, as we say in 63, I think it is, you would want you'd want to be using this. What you'd like to see is how well do they structure this early on in the semester, and there you'd like to see how well do they maneuver the model, right? So you'd like to see their prompts, every one of their prompts, their working papers, and their output because you'd like to follow the train of thought, much like you do with research papers in the sciences. You see all of it, right? Um, by the time you get to the end of the semester, we'd like to be able to see that the prompts and the working papers and the output are driven mostly by the human, not by the model. So even though it may be the same subject, you can see how it evolved and what the influence the human had on this. And you see it through the prompts, the working papers, and the output. So the way of using this is also the way that we see it could be used in classrooms, and not in fear that you'd have somebody using it as a productivity tool inappropriately and copying things. We'd actually make it so that it's going to be hard to copy because of the contextual question we're asking, which is a relevant question for this moment that didn't exist 6 months ago or a year ago. So, with that, I will say it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long.
Bye, Duda.